Pascal, what say you? The United States has provided billions in military aid to Israel, effectively underwriting its military operations and occupation. This financial and military support has emboldened Israel's expansionist policies, making the U.S. complicit in the atrocities committed against Palestinians. From a left perspective, we must challenge this narrative, recognizing that U.S. foreign policy in the region is not about democracy or peace, but about maintaining hegemony and control over a strategic region through an imperialist alliance with Israel. How do we on the left challenge that? Or can we even challenge that?
Well, I think that one thing that's become obvious for me is that what is going on in the Middle East, particularly with Gaza and the Palestinians, is going to have a tangible effect on what's happening with the election. Because the Green Party has decided to make its vice presidential candidate Muslim intellectual Butch Ware, who has a pretty strong recognition in the Muslim American space, there's a strong possibility that large numbers of active Muslims or religious Muslims in places like Michigan, places like Florida, Chicago, and Illinois are going to support the Green Party. Those votes can make a difference between Kamala Harris winning those electoral spaces and losing. So I'm not making predictions, but what I'm saying is that I think that the Democrats assuming that they can just neglect the concern of large numbers of Palestinians and Muslims in this election over this subject matter is going to be have some definitely negative consequences. And I think that the way the Green Party has played this may end up costing this a couple of key states to the Democratic Party in this election as well.
Electra, what say
Yeah,
you?
I was about to say, if I may, I fully agree with you. And I would like to um, highlight that it's not only Muslims, Arabs, Palestinians, there are also many outraged Americans who do not culturally, identify with any of these groups. They just want to take a stance against genocide. And quite frankly, it's not only their inability, their straightforward stupidity, if you ask me, to appreciate how internal dynamics are changing. It's also the arrogance that they so unapologetically demonstrate towards their own voters, right? They're really making a very conscious effort to become the new serious Republican Party, right? Trump has
Hmm.
taken over the Republican Party. It's a different creature. It's a populist, far right, whatever you want to call it, but it is not the Bush Republican Party anymore. So we see the Cheney's migrating in a very straightforward way
Yeah.
with their supporters and everybody else to the Democratic Party. And Kamala Harris, our hope for change, I'm being sarcastic here, is campaigning as we speak with Liz Cheney herself. So they're making a very deliberate choice to tell their own voting base that they can go screw themselves, quite frankly, because what 95% or I think the number is like 90 or 95% of Democrats seem to want regarding the war, the Middle East, or in general, doesn't matter at all. The uncommitted, which as that's how we met, right? We're representing this final effort to save the Democratic Party from itself. We're not even given the opportunity to speak at the convention. All kinds of corporate Republicans were celebrated as heroes that are going to bring the real America to the party, right? And unapologetically so, we have Kamala Harris herself campaigning with Liz Cheney, who is telling good Republicans that this should be their choice as a Republican, that the Democratic Party represents the Republican values, whereas Donald Trump is a populist thug. And we can all agree that Donald Trump is a populist thug. But the question that emerges here is that what are our choices, right? So we have these migration of Republicans, like serious deep state warmongering Republicans to the Democratic Party, thereby unsurprisingly. So not only they don't want to stop the war, they profiteer from it. This is everything they stand for. And like the wild card of Donald Trump, possible Donald Trump presidency, which nobody knows what's going to happen. So I fully agree with what you said. I think it's a manifestation of arrogance, profound stupidity, and they will pay a price for it because many of their voters, including myself, traditional voting groups, are just outraged. And it's not only because of the genocide, it's just one too many for many, many traditional voting blocs at this point. My 2 cents.
Jason, are you calling on me to answer some questions right
Yeah,
now?
I'm putting you in the is if this is Hollywood Squares, then the camera's on you.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So the
Well,
camera's on you.
obviously this conflict is going to have an effect on the American election in some way or another, whether directly, as Pascal and Electoral pointed out, turning off certain voting blocs, but also indirectly in terms of how it is driving a broader realignment in the amongst the American political elite. I think the observation that you're seeing a lot of these Republicans from the Bush era migrating across to the Democratic Party, I don't think that is particularly a new development. We've been seeing that since 2016. Basically, you have the liquidation of the Trump, wing of the party, took over the party and ousted the kind of professional cadre of the Republican Party, the consultant class, the establishment, deep state people, and a lot of those people have found a home in the Democratic Party, and that's going to have implications. But in terms of the conflict, if we look regionally, this conflict is there is no kind of end point for this conflict for the Israelis, in the sense that they've launched this war in Gaza, and now they're opening up a second front in Lebanon. They've been behaving provocatively for the last year, and what I mean by this specifically is, you have, for example, the violation of diplomatic norms. I don't have any particular love for the Iranian government or for the Syrian government, but when you bomb a consul in Syria, that is a kind of violation of the kind of fundamental basis of international law, and so you've had this like ongoing destabilization. Now, my conspiracy theory, as it were, is that what we're seeing probably at the moment behind the scenes is a repeat of what happened in 1968. I think that probably the Israeli government is in communications with the Trump campaign. I mean, it obviously is in communications, but I think, the Trump campaign is perhaps saying, like, don't end this conflict until we're elected, right? And I think that one of the reasons let's put it this way. Even if you say, look, after November the 7th, Israel was going to cross into Gaza, that's was going to happen. And I can understand that perspective. You have an attack, what do you expect a state to do? A state will respond in a particular way. But, there have been numerous off-ramps, especially in November last year when there was the opportunity for a peace, some kind of a negotiated peace and ceasefire. The Israelis didn't go for it. And instead, we've been seeing this war being sustained. Now, I think in the short term, this is perhaps, and again, this is my conspiracy theory about it. I think that the Israelis are hoping to undermine the Democratic Party and have them lose an election and have a Trump administration that is going to be more favorable to the kind of outcomes that they're looking for. And then I think in a broader perspective, I think what people have to understand what I understand by the Israeli policy is that Actually, the truth is the Israelis don't believe in that peace is possible, and they don't even believe that peace is a kind of good thing to have anyway. I think the Israeli policy at the moment is based on a kind of escalating violence, based on this doctrine of mowing the lawn, that they will impose enormous cost of violence on Palestinians and neighboring Arab countries that will buy them X amount of time of peace until the next crisis blows up, in which case I think they believe, well, then we will just exercise another wing of violence. In the short and medium term, I think this is actually a sustainable policy for the Israelis. The reason I say it's sustainable is because, for example, if you compare it to South Africa, the demographic balance in Israel Palestine is not so overwhelmingly in favor of one side. White people, I think, made 10%, 12% of the South African population, and they were also, the white population was fundamentally economically dependent on black labor. The entire apartheid system was, in part driven by a desire for to hyper exploit black labor in South Africa. In Israel, there's a kind of different dynamic. They want the land without the Palestinians, and the demographic balance is, they have enough people to kind of maintain that occupation in the short and medium term. Secondly, at least in the short and medium term, they have the undying support of the Western powers. So I think for the Israelis, this is what they see as being a sustainable policy, that there will be these periodic flare-ups. They will use an enormous amount of violence to silence them down and buy themselves a sort of period of peace. I think that's the doctrine that's going forward. Whether that's sustainable in the long term, and we were talking before the show with Electoral about this, and I think she'll disagree with me on this. I don't know if that's sustainable in the long term, but I think what the long term says is there will be two ends to this. Either you will have to have some kind of democratization on that territory between the river and the sea. There'll have to be either democratization or the annihilation of enough of the Palestinian population to ensure that they are never ever a demographic threat, quote unquote, to Jewish supremacy in that region. So I think there are two paths where this can go. One is a genocidal path, and one is one where you'll have democratization. But I don't think there's a kind of middle road, because I think the fact that settlement in the West Bank has advanced so far, and there's so much interpenetration of those populations, and that the settler population is so influential in Israeli politics, I think the two-state solution has effectively been foreclosed. I mean, I know people would say, well, the two-state solution is not ideal. Yeah, of course, but if it could be reached and it could calm the situation down, that would be fantastic. But I think that has been foreclosed by realities on the ground, and the fact that the Israelis don't, openly say that they don't support the two-state solution anymore. Because ultimately, what I see with a lot of these mainstream media justifications for Israeli policy now, it's remarkably a pessimistic discourse. There was the interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates the other day on CBS morning show, where the questioner was criticizing Ta-Nehisi Coates for his comparison of Israel to Jim Crow America and apartheid. But ultimately his argument came down to yes, but have you considered that the Palestinians deserve to live under occupation and apartheid? So that is kind of that's kind of my perspective on this. Short to medium term, it looks pretty grim. Long term, who even knows? But I would be wary of predicting the future.
Brother Varn?
Oh, there's a lot to talk about here. I was thinking about the situation in 2006 with Lebanon and the U.S. actions there versus now. In 2006, in the Lebanon War, Bolton held out the blocking of a call for a ceasefire for a month. Then he blamed the Israelis' failure to remove Hezbollah threats for eventually supporting the ceasefire. Now, of course, he had to put it in bellicose neoconservative framework. That's Bolton's deal. He's probably one of the worst one of them. But when we look at what they actually did, the Harris the current Biden-Harris administration is actually maintaining something to the right on foreign policy of the Bush administration. And the question is why? Because that's something that I think we have to deal with the electoral dynamics of the United States a little bit more than the Democrats might lose, because, yeah, they might. It's a toss-up. The treatment of the Palestinians, plus some smart moving by the Greens, may cost them some key areas. It won't get the Greens even 5% of the U.S. vote. I'm willing to stake money on that, but it could, be a spoiler. And before people think that this means that I'm endorsing the Democrats, they deserve to be spoiled. My thinking about this, though, about why it doesn't seem to matter, is that the other alternative is actually closer to the Netanyahu government than even the Biden-Harris administration is. So that dynamic is something. When we say we don't know what Trump's going to do, we have a good idea what he's going to do on Gaza. We don't know what he's going to do on other geopolitical issues, and the invoking of the Iranians actually produces a double bind for the Trump administration. On one hand, Trump wants to ease ties with Russia, which Iranians are a long-standing ally. On the other hand, Trump seems to really have it out for the Iranians. So there's a lot of geopolitical betting on all sides about how different demographics are captured. There is nowhere for them to go. Now, I have no idea how long. We talk about the situation in the Levant, and there's other mitigating factors we have to look at. Mohammed bin Salman, which desperately wants to normalize relationships with Israel, has finally backed off and is actually making something that I would have never predicted in my life, some concessionary olive branches to Iran, which that is a really big game changer in a lot of ways, as well as saying that that even though he wants to normalize relations with Israel, he cannot do so until there's a recognized Palestinian state. So there's a lot of different dynamics going on in the region. I mean, we've seen Israel expand into Syria and do what, I feel like half the countries in the region are doing, which is use Syria as a bond pincushion. If we can go over the number of bombings that have happened in Syria since 2013, it's actually kind of astronomical. So there's a lot to see about the destabilization of the region. One thing we're going to need to watch for, how long are U.S. bases in Iraq going to be safe? When are we going to see more active attacks on the bases in the area? That might push opinion in a different way. There's a lot of volatility here, but I will say, one thing that I've thought about a lot when we talk about the U.S. response to it, I've gone through my trilemma of the Biden administration's talk about de-escalating. They're either lying, which a Political article last week indicates they are. They're lying about it, or they're lying about it because they're afraid that they actually couldn't do it anyway. Even though there's no way in the long run for the U.S. For the Israel to survive this without U.S. support, in the short run, Netanyahu may be playing games in a way that he would ignore the U.S. imperative, even if they did slow down munitions shipments. I don't know that. That actually seems like a wild card, but it has actually occurred to me that might be part of what they're at least afraid of. Or they're incredibly incompetent. But I'll be honest with you, their continuances of shipping the amount of munitions they are to Israel means that the incompetence would have to be pretty delusional for that to be the answer. So we can pretty much scratch that one off. We put the second answer as more likely, so it leaves us with the first one, that they're most likely lying. And I think it's pretty obvious to everyone else. The question is, however, is any other major power willing to put real stakes in the game? Not symbolic, not rhetorical, actual stakes. The expansion of things with Iran does actually make that seemingly possible. But so far, I have been surprised at how little some of the non-Western powers they've even done and doing anything more than symbolic pushbacks. There's probably reasons for that have to do with technological and weapons systems integration between Israel and some of these other great powers. But I can't imagine that they're actually that important to risk delegitimacy, which in all cases, there is a threat of delegitimization. Even in the U.S., I mean, this is one of the few times we've seen I can't think of a time where both on the center right and the center left, not just the far left, I've seen pretty deep sympathies towards Palestinians in America. Now, are they deep enough for anyone to vote on it outside of those particular areas that we're talking about earlier in Michigan and Dearborn and whatnot? I don't know. And that seems to be the Democratic Party's gambit here. But it does seem like it's an ever-evolving situation that's very shitty. We haven't mentioned the elephant in the room. We're all waiting on bated breath on what Bibi Netanyahu's or whatever government they have, it's not the work cabinet anymore, is going to do in response to the Iranian infrastructure missiles, which we know that the Iranians at the time, I mean, people were like, oh, it's like the bombing of Dresden. I was like, oh, that's stupid. And then I looked at it and I'm like, oh, they didn't kill a single person. Like, they strategically targeted very specific areas. The Iron Dome, supposedly, they were claiming at first it took out like 50% of the missiles. It looks like they took out about 10. The Iron Dome is not designed to deal with like proper rockets. It's more like whatever rockets you can cobble up in a kitchen sink in areas that are war-torn already. So what the response to that will be, that's going to be a big deal. And I actually don't know the US's calculus on that. I can't entirely figure it out. So, yeah.